Hello, my progressive family. It's Pastor Bird from the Zion Baptist Church in Northwest Washington, D.C., also proudly serving as your second vice president. On behalf of our president, Dr. Timothy Stewart, and our first vice president, Dr. David Peoples, I am so proud to bring some awesome information to you. Today, the Progressive Hour. It's information you can use and you won't want to miss. We're doing our best to represent you well. Also, I hope you've marked your calendar for our mid-year winter board meeting. It will be in January. It's Martin Luther King's birthday week, January the 18th through Thursday, January the 21st. You don't want to miss it. And yes, it will be a virtual experience. We're so excited about what Progressive is continuing to do on your behalf. So join us for the Progressive Hour and stay tuned for more information about our mid-year session, January 18th through January 21st, 2021. But until then, don't forget to vote and don't forget to stay progressive.
Good evening, Progressive. I'm excited about this conversation that we're getting ready to undertake around some very, very vital, life-changing, democracy-protecting measures that so many of us have been thinking about since the last presidential election, and some of us who are more engaged have been thinking deeply about since the last midterm elections, since that last historic victory. But I'm excited to be here today to host this conversation during the Progressive Hour, a monthly conversation that our convention is offering to us. And I'm grateful for our president, grateful for President Dr. Stewart for creating this opportunity for us to lead and for us to share and for the entire cabinet that supports this president and supports our convention. And I'm grateful today to be joined by two great minds, by two people I admire deeply for the work that they do in the pulpit and outside of the pulpit. I'm grateful that we have the Reverend Dr. Leslie Copeland Toome with us today. She is the Chief Operating Officer of the National Council of Churches, and we're excited to have her voice. And also, we have the pastor of the St. Paul's Baptist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a swing state, the Reverend Dr. Leslie Callahan, who is joining us today. And she is, I always love to hear it, love to say it as well, she's the first woman to hold the position as senior pastor at the St. Paul's Church. And I'm just excited to be here with two history makers as we talk about the role of our convention, the role of faith in this election cycle, and what our individual responsibilities are to guarantee that justice is realized this time around. Just in case we didn't think it was the last time around. So welcome to this conversation. Today we're talking about voting, right? We know that this convention has historically been known for its protest dimensions, known for its policy advocacy, known for being a voice that actually attempts to cut through the chatter, to cut through the dominant narratives and stories that are often told about what our country should be around, even what it means to be a person of faith. And I think that what the opportunity we have here is to also cast a Christian vision. And I think that's important to name because, and maybe this is just my experience, my experience is that I generally cringe when we talk about the Christian vote in this country, because the Christian vote has seemingly been monopolized by one segment of the Christian community. And I always think it's important for us to have these conversations that, one, broaden the narrative or nuance the narrative in real ways, but also to remind this country that all Christians are not white evangelicals, and that Black people actually do vote from a place of faith and from those Christian values as well. So as we launch into this conversation, can you give some insight, give some commentary on what it means to vote in this particular moment as Black and as Christian?
I was going to let you go first, Pastor.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think this is worthy of extensive conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Francois. Thank you to President Stewart for the opportunity to participate in the Progressive Hour. I think so much of what you said is right on target. And for a long time, at least I would say for a generation, Christian voting has been identified totally with the white evangelical Christian right. I think that started in we began to witness it in the 1980s as they did a great job in taking over the narrative. They claimed the language. And I think we didn't necessarily respond quickly enough in claiming our own identity as Christians. What I think it means to be Christian, not just to vote as a Christian, but to be Christian, is to believe that God in Christ reconciles the world, and that has meaning for our lives as individuals, and it has meaning for our lives as a community, and that God's intention for the world is good. So when I vote, when we do anything, we do it out of that vision. I mean, that's a total vision. That's not a compartmentalized vision. It doesn't apply to one aspect of a person's life and not to the other. I think that the place where I depart from white evangelicals, the most at the core, is what I believe the world is that God in Christ is bringing into being, and that God in Christ calls us to participate in. There is a tendency, I think, and not just among white evangelicals, but even among our sort of purportedly apolitical colleagues, there's a tendency to emphasize the spiritual and ignore the communal, to ignore the totality of persons' lives. What I see, so when I vote, what I'm looking for is, does this move us closer to a common humanity where the oppressed go free, where the hungry are fed, where there's a sense of well-being for everybody, irrespective of whatever other categories there might be? How can I move on a day-to-day basis? How can I move us forward towards what I believe is God's vision for the world? What policies, what positions, what perspectives move us forward? The one other thing I'll say by way of introduction is, and I recognize that no individual and no party and no particular election will completely realize that vision. Okay. But what I feel like I have a moral responsibility to do as a Christian is to make day-to-day decisions, not only about voting, but about life in general, that move us toward that's, Christians are called to live in the world we believe is to come, to live in the reality of what we believe God has done in Christ Jesus. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make day-to-day decisions that move in that direction, that point towards my deepest conviction.
Yeah, I would agree. I would echo that. I think, in a democracy, the way that we have a voice is to vote, right? So as citizens in this country, part of our responsibility is to make sure that we're voting for leaders who, number one, lead. So that's even a whole nother PMBC hour. And also who will enact laws that and policies that help the most vulnerable in our society. I think that's part of who we are called to be. I think that's God's expectation of us. I think when we talk about Matthew 25, too often we don't read it in full context. We skip Matthew 23, which I think Jesus is cussing out the church leaders, like, do what they say, but don't do what they do, right? And pointing to the Pharisees and how they say one thing, but do another. Haven't we seen plenty of that during this, well, the past 4 years, and certainly during this election cycle? But I think God really is calling us to be a new creation. That salvation we have, and I think this is as Dr. Callahan said, this is a Christian right kind of, it's all about the personal salvation piece. But there's an expectation in scripture, as I read it, that there's a communal aspect to salvation, that salvation isn't happening in a silo, but there's an expectation that when the woman at the well meets Jesus, she's running back to the people who talk bad about her and telling them all about a man, meet a man, come meet a man, she says, who told me all about myself. And so that whole community is changed because of what happened to her, right? So in Christ, we are a new creation. The old has passed away. So there's an expectation, I think, that God has, that when we are operating in this world, when we're operating in this country, we're going to use what we have. And the vote is certainly a huge part of the power and the voice that we have. And we're going to do it in a way that makes sure the hungry are fed, that the prisoner is visited, that the captives are set free, that the oppressed, that we can declare the year of the Lord for the oppressed. And that when we don't participate, when we don't do that, that we are missing out on fully operating, I think, in who God has called us to be as witnesses in this world that we have right now.
Right.
Yeah, we are, so the world has been on fire, and 400 years of Black disinheritance and Black oppression is it's being talked about more now. It is not being as obscured in popular outlets as it has been in the past. And as this racial reckoning that we hoped was happening, and it seems to have waned a bit, as I'm sure we expected it. But there seemed like right after the death of George Floyd, and then the kind of groundswell and momentum that really happened as Breonna Taylor's case became more popular. It seemed as if there was a lot of power that was packing the streets. There was a lot of anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic power that was really showing up in the streets. And, while they were marching on gentrified streets, these white liberals were like, yeah, Black lives do matter. And I'm wondering, is there something still there? Are there smolderings of that racial reckoning that we can actually use as faith communities, as faith leaders, as churches? Is there something still in the streets, something still brewing in that moment that we can use in these last few days to get people either to the polls physically or to their mailbox or drop box, however that's looking? Is there a way for us to use that, whatever's left, to turn protest into power?
So, I think some of it is going to require an analysis of what happened, what was driving the energy of the summer, the late spring, early summer, in terms of the protests and the expression of, and I think it matters. I mean, I think that the symbolic matters. I think saying Black Lives Matter matters. There was a moment where people were really hesitant to say it, and some folks remain hesitant to say it. And so the fact that that's true means that people on some level are taking a side. and that's critical. I think one thing that we should do is we should continue to highlight the ways in which the rhetoric of white supremacy and the actuality of white supremacy are embedded in certain kinds of policies. And I think we can name and call out that reality, and then call upon the same folks who were in the street saying Black Lives Matter, who, particularly those gentrified streets, the suburban streets, we can call on them and say, so in June you said Black Lives Matter. In late September, early October, the President of the United States said that the people who advocated for Black lives are going to destroy suburbs, that the suburbs are no longer going to exist. Okay, you were in those suburban streets saying Black Lives Matter, repudiate that secondary position. It's a pretty direct, to me, line. Now, I think the question about, whether the reaction of some of the folks who were in the streets was the reaction of folks who had been shut up for weeks and were glad to be out I think that remains to be seen. But I think that's the question we can ask. Like, okay, what were you doing? Were you about this life? Were you, because quite frankly, from my perspective, voting against the current occupant of the White House, who makes close connections between himself and explicit white supremacist ideas, is the low-hanging fruit in terms of answering the question of, did you mean it when you said Black Lives Matter? But it's fruit we need picked on November 3rd. Between now and November 3rd, as early voting continues and so on, pick that fruit. Don't skip it. And it's not a bad start. So I think right now, in this moment that we're in, asking people to put their vote, the least they can do is to put their vote behind their sentiment.
Yeah, I think, and let me also thank Dr. Stewart. I realize I kind of jumped right in PNBC for this. This is really great. And I'm honored to be with my namesake and one of my favorite pastors in the nation. I should say two, right? Dr. Francois as well. But let me say, I do think we should be voting evangelists at this point. And from now through November 3rd, we should be encouraging, urging, shouting from the rooftops, singing, whatever we have to do, posting, tweeting, Instagram, to really encourage people to vote. And I think there is some energy still left. I know there's some people who are still, out in different ways. There's a lot more dispersed than it was obviously over the summer and June, et cetera, but that there are people still out there, people organizing. I just think we really have to shout from the rooftops how much this matters. I do think that people are starting to put those, connect the dots, and that is a critical piece of it. That there has been this way that we haven't understood that, the person who is in the White House can present a budget that cuts SNAP for people, or the person who's the head of the Senate. We definitely need to get Kentucky people out, because that dude has let COVID relief, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. The senator has felt like some other things, everything in fact, is more important than another COVID relief package. How can that be? We have an economic crisis on top of a global pandemic, on top of racial reckoning in this country. We have all kinds of chaos everywhere, and you want to do what? You don't want people to eat. You want people to get kicked out of their apartments. I mean, it's not acceptable. And so I think people are starting to make connect those dots, but to the extent that we can continue to help connect those dots for people, even with the Supreme Court, honestly, we have not always thought about what it means to have a Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education versus Plessy versus Ferguson, right? And so as healthcare is about to come up, we know that they're going to vote on that. And we're in the middle of a global pandemic under an administration that wants to end healthcare for all people, while we need healthcare more now than anything. That is not a partisan issue. That is a gospel issue, right? That is the gospel true and wrapped up into our own situations of where we sit right now. And so to the extent that we can continue to just get that message out to people, to encourage people to vote, to make a voting plan, and to get out there, because our lives really are at stake. It's not even, it's not a hyperbole. It's not us over speaking. It's not us being melodramatic. Lives are literally at stake. And, we've all been impacted by COVID and what's happening with coronavirus. I've lost friends. I was sharing my aunt, and I got permission from my cousin to talk about this, but my aunt a few days ago was diagnosed with coronavirus, and three of my cousins, my aunt and three of my cousins. And so, it was hitting home for me before, because it doesn't have to impact me specifically for me to understand how it impacts families, nor should it any of us, right? Because we're supposed to be caring for one another. And how do you not care what's happening with somebody else who's impacted? But certainly it brings it to a different position when you have an aunt who is the matriarch of your family fighting for her life in the hospital, So.
Right. I think your point is very, very specific and pointed. And it's interesting. I've thought many times about how I felt the morning after the 2016 presidential election, and just the horror. And I said, many of us said, I wasn't asleep at this time during that process either. We said people will die because of this very poor decision. We said it. There were folks who told us that we were being extreme. There are people who made the point that people die in every administration, which is certainly true. But the sense that we had that particularly the lives of Black people and poor people and Black women and Native American folks and immigrants from everywhere and brown people, that our lives were in jeopardy, that sense we were not exaggerating. And I am mindful to say that when the hurricane struck Puerto Rico, people died because we had incompetent and uncaring administration. There were some things that you need the government to do.
Right.
There's some things that praying by itself won't do. There's some things that good charitable organizations within communities and in churches and so on will not do. There are some things that we need the government to do. People died in Puerto Rico because we did not have a government that could care about folks who didn't vote for him. We saw it immediately. That was just a harbinger of things to come. Now 215,000 people in the United States have died. One in something like 1,100 African Americans. There are many, many, many thousands of Black people who were alive in February, who would still be alive in October if we had a different president. Not even if we had Hillary Clinton. If someone else had won the Republican primary, we likely would have had a more consistent and response to a global pandemic than the one we have had. So I think, now at this point, I feel like I agree with you. We need to be we need to be voting evangelists. And I think we need to say it just as bluntly as you said it, as I say it. Lives and our own lives hang in the balance. If you know somebody with hypertension, if you know somebody with diabetes, if you know somebody with asthma, if you know somebody who has any kind of pre-existing condition or just happens to be Black, it would seem, we're not done with coronavirus. So the decision that we make in this election will have implications. There'll be people in your congregation who will live or die depending on how we do this November. And that's not an exaggeration. It's simply a fact. Now, I don't know I mean, I'm stunned by the fact that in the midst of this, I'm like, what does it take for people?
Right. I mean, and I have thought about this a lot because I honestly get a little frustrated. I also get a little frustrated when and I'm not saying this naively. I understand 501c3 or whatever, but some of this is not partisan. It's not
Right.
about it. Anybody who embodied what we're seeing right now would need to be rebuked, just as if
Right.
it doesn't matter. Like, we cannot, first of all, I don't want to live with this whole drama, this roller coaster, up and down,
Right.
up and down, every time you turn around. I just think it's unhealthy in general, the kind of drama that we've had to live through these last 4 years,
Agreed.
particularly, these last 6 months. I think when somebody is more sympathetic to racists and white supremacists than they are to people who are dying in hospitals, then, that is a reason to pause and say, maybe this isn't who I should be supporting.
Right.
And why am I supporting this? What exactly am I thinking that I think this is, what God had intended for leadership? Because if we check the book, Old Testament, New Testament, minor prophets, major prophets, the Psalm, like, there's a whole lot of instruction about how to lead, honestly, how to care for people, how to care for one another. I don't see it coming from the highest levels of our government in this moment. So I want us to feel empowered to be able to say that. It's not personal. We're Baptist, so we believe in transformation. We believe anybody can change, all of that. But at the same time, we know that our people are at risk now, that people have died, as Dr. Callahan said, at the border. People have died
Absolutely.
in Charlottesville. People have died.
Absolutely.
So
right.
it is enough. This is not, it's enough. And we have an option. We have power that we can use, that we can take. We need our churches to, I think, be out there, providing ministry at the polls with little bottles of water, maybe a little snack, or maybe a folding chair with a wipe to wipe it down between people, since the lines are so crazy and long. But I think we just have to do what we have to do in order to move our country in a different direction. It will not fix everything, obviously, on that one day, but it certainly won't be what we're dealing with right now.
There's
Yeah. Can we just talk about the chaos for just a second? And I just, that you said it early in your comments, Dr. Copeland, and I want to just underscore that. It isn't healthy to live with the kind of, I would think that even people with who share policy perspectives would be tired of the chaos that is involved in having someone who really just cares about ratings and cares about creating a spectacle. You would hope that a person who have more conservative leanings than I have would want a standard bearer for those perspectives who's not a fool.
sure.
So I just want to second that. And I agree, it's not healthy for us. It's not healthy. It's not mentally healthy for us to live in this kind of chaos.
And shout out for a full sentence. Like, I'm sorry, that's probably petty, so forgive me, but
It's not,
I'm looking for a full sentence.
No, I mean it's important, particularly when this rhetoric is beyond just words. Like, this rhetoric has done significant harm. This rhetoric has led to cells, radical reactionary cells in our country that of white supremacists, of self-avowed white supremacists who believe that they can kidnap sitting governors.
Right.
This rhetoric, these fragmented sentences that we've had to live through for the past 4 years have done significant harm, and has really agitated and given life, breathed oxygen into some of the worst impulses that have never really disappeared in this country.
Right.
That we would like to believe we've assimilated ourselves out of, integrated ourselves out of, voted ourselves out of. But there are some significantly evil impulses that are not just alive, but have a very seemingly a more prominent role today than they have had in so long. So we're living through a lot of chaos. But Dr. Copeland, you mentioned. You mentioned healthcare, right? And you mentioned the Supreme Court. And Dr. Callahan, you talked about, we're at 215 casualties now to this poor administration. And there's an expected 200,000 more to happen to us, into the new year, the early part of the new year. And what does that mean? That means that, we have 400,000 people whose lives are gone too soon, unnecessarily. But you also have millions of Americans that now have a new pre-existing condition. As the Supreme Court, the week after the election, is poised to strike down Affordable Care Act as unconstitutional, and that can really happen if Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed in the incoming days. I wonder, as we think about that, as we think about the importance of the courts, and even as I think about the history of how the right took over the courts, as wanting to undo Brown v. Board, wanting to maintain segregated schools, and they were able to use anti-abortion messaging as a way of hiding the true intent to be racist and segregationist. But for 40 plus years, they've done a work to shape the court in their image, right? Why do you think people who are less conservative than the religious right, folk that think, closer to how, we may think, who have values the way we have values around justice, around equality, around, the dignity of all human beings. Why do you think people, to the center and the left have not made the same kind of play for our judiciary the way conservatives have? And what have we lost because we haven't done that?
So I this is a great question. It's something I think a lot about, and I think there are a number of answers, some of which we can't fix. It's the tendency of folks who are on more to the liberal left side of things. This is true theologically and politically. We have the kind of empathy that allows us to see multiple sides to an issue. It makes it harder for us to encapsulate it in a stock phrase that we then can sort of give to people and say, okay, this is the thing to say about this. I'll make the point sort of theologically, right? I'm not conservative theologically either. And I've recognized that the work of discipling people is much harder when you can't just say, do this, because in chapter 3, verse 2, it says this.
Right.
If you can't say to people, if you give $5, the Lord will give you 500 back, the good case that you make about stewardship and giving and sharing resources and all that becomes a more difficult case, right? From a political standpoint, so there's some of it's just the way, and you can see this actually studies about what what sorts of people tend to be more liberal in the way those folks think. And the structures of thinking are just different. Like, they don't tend to think in black and white. They tend to think in shades of gray. The other piece is, so that's a kind of, I don't know, but there's some practical things. We don't have as many talk radio stations. So I think we got to look at the conservative movement, the conservative political movement, and we've got to see the religious right on the one hand, but we also have to see talk radio. We have to see, if you think about the person who's president now, try to imagine how we became, as a nation, so desensitized to the very crassness that characterizes the current president. We became desensitized. The people who like him listen to Rush Limbaugh. They listen to Howard Stern. They listened. The crassness doesn't seem crass. So all of that's a long way of saying that I think we lost the battle at the level of the rhetoric, both because we haven't known how to state our case in a way that's succinct and then can be sort of carried. On the one hand, on the other hand, we haven't made as good use of media, of public. I mean, even if you go to something like QAnon, right? They created this conspiracy theory structure that's driving people to try to kidnap the governor of Michigan and plot to kidnap the governor of Virginia, through the use of kind of psychologically driven social media. Yeah. So if you think of folks like Steve Bannon, who ran the Trump campaign in 2016, I mean, I'm just saying, like, there's some technical stuff that we're behind on that's part of the structures of how they've created complete amnesia about previous positions. 50 years ago, when Roe v. Wade was initially decided, lots of the same people who are like, abortion is the worst thing in the world, thought it was a perfectly reasonable legal ruling. They weren't anti-abortion. So I think we've got to figure out, I think our side has got to figure out the rhetorical stuff. How do we make our case in a way that, how do we write the vision and so somebody can read it from afar and run with it?
Yeah. And I want to be fact checked on this, but I'm pretty sure part of the strategy for the Christian right and the conservative movement was to acquire radio stations, like acquire the media to get those messages out.
Yeah,
and
I think that's right.
And a mission accomplished. So I think, we need to be thinking about that. Like, how do we get the message out? And when you have kind of two messages, 2 points, it's a lot different than when you're saying we care for the poor, we care for the seniors, we care, so it's a whole lot more to embrace. I think I want to push people on, what does the gospel say about who we should be caring about, and how we should be caring for one another. So I think that would really, if we could really do that kind of discipleship, in our churches about what that means, and in a way that, in love, I would say, because too often churches have been known for condemnation, known for, you don't do this, as opposed to, here's how you love, here's how you care for one another. So I would hope that we would do that. I think the Supreme Court issue, sometimes people are they don't understand all of the intricacies. I don't even know that I understand all the intricacies of how people get to, even be considered. And I think sometimes people just flatline, right? They just are really, it's too overwhelming to process it all. And I get that. Everybody's got a lot going on in their lives. But I do think that this is a moment for us to be re-engaging, to even recognize the vote is one thing, but after the vote is a whole other host of things that we should be looking at on the local level as well as the state and federal level, that it doesn't end with the vote. The vote is one part of the process. And that if, a different administration comes in January, we need to hold them to the fire. We need to be
Absolutely.
advocating. We can't just say, oh, we did it and walk away, but we need to continue to be pushing and to make sure that the things that we care about and that our communities are taken care of. The vote is just one piece of it. And the Supreme Court, I do feel a little helpless. I don't know about you. Like right now, I just feel like there's not much we can do. We can just hope that things go right, and not right, but go the way we want. And don't want it to go anymore. But that things go the way we want in November, and then we can look at how to right and to make the ship a little upright. It's also interesting to me that, and I feel like God is calling the people who say they're pro-life, that God has really been calling their bluff, right? One of the young people at the March for Our Lives said, we call BS, right? So I feel like God is like, I'm calling BS. You say that you're pro-life, but you don't have anything to say. I mean, not anything to say when somebody has their life snuffed out of them right before you with a knee on their neck. You say you're pro-life, but a woman who is an EMT who's asleep in her bed loses her life, you've got nothing to say. You say you're pro-life, but you won't wear a mask, which will help somebody else to stay alive and not get sick, even though you don't even know if you have the virus. You may be asymptomatic, you don't know what's going on, but you refuse to wear a mask and actually save somebody else's life. So I think there's a way in which God is really putting honestly on display some of what we say who we are, some of what we say we believe, and saying, okay, let's see what you really believe, and calling BS. And I think it's time for us to say, okay, no, we are actually pro-life. We do care about the lives of God's people. And this is how we're going to show it. This is how we're going to show up. This is how we're going to cast our ballot. This is how we're going to make sure that our communities and our people are taken care of. Because we are, I think it's the NAACP, we are sick of dying. It's dramatic. Every day you turn around, somebody else has got a hashtag. We're sick of it. And we don't have to take it. We don't have to go down like this. We have options and we have power.
Yes.
Yeah, you both brought up something so powerful. Like, it's one of the paradoxes of the right that I've not really been able to wrestle with, and part of it is this presumption of pro-life, which we know has really been empty and hollow for so long, because pro-life means one thing, and it just means restricting women's rights and creating new forms of restrictions for women. And I think that's part of the question that I'm wrestling with is that I'll get to in a moment. But it's interesting that the individual liberties people, the right claims to be so invested in individual liberties. I have my rights. You can't take my rights, right? That's like a rallying cry on the right. But these same people who believe in individual liberties are the very people who are endorsing anti-abortion, anti-marriage positions that actually deny people's religious liberties, right? Because I think it is to affirm someone's right to control their own body, to make their own health decisions. That's a faith issue for people too. That's religious too. The idea of being able to love, that's a religious issue as well. And so their positions actually betray their commitment to individual liberties and what they claim to have commitments to religious liberties as well. I'm interested in this question though. Are there aspects of the theologies that are alive in local Black churches all over this country? Are there aspects of our theologies that actually prevent us from having a real politic that's Christian, right? Are we actually not able to be political and Christian in this country because there are things in our theologies that actually get in the way? There are things in our theologies that are actually not Christian, that we have labeled Christian, that actually make us horrible political agents.
So I think this Dr. Copeland said a little while ago about, how we're Baptists. And one thing that our Baptist forebears got right was a conception of soul freedom, freedom of conscience, that said that none of us are free to the extent that people's consciences are constrained. And they represented that as a theological problem, as a problem of agency, that people could not choose the good if they didn't have the option to choose elsewhere or choose otherwise. What's very interesting about the definitions of freedom that play out in people saying, I should be free not to wear a mask, is that they are so individualized. Right. I think that those issues get at the question you're talking about, like what. So one thing I think that's present in our theologies, in many of our church theologies, including in Black Baptist churches, is a desire, is a view of leadership as control. So it's hard for us to have good politics, especially around actual freedom of conscience, if we believe what it means for us to exercise good leadership is to control our environment. So, and to control the people in it.
Right.
So this is part of the problem. So that the definition of freedom that so many folks in the religious right have is their freedom to tell other people what to do, and nobody can stop them from that. So their freedom to tell folks who they can marry, to tell folks how, when and whether they can make health decisions. And I think this has got to be said. It's not just abortion. In danger right now is various forms of reproductive technologies like IVF, and even the pill, not, and I don't just mean the morning after pill or Plan B. I mean the regular old birth control pill is in the sights of many of these folks. And this is a theological problem of control, and it is one we share, including the part where we're attracted to authoritarians, to people. We believe people who have power are God's people. And so that's why it's a problem in white theological circles, in that they can't distinguish between the evil that's present in the White House and power. I mean, they don't know that's evil. Yeah. But we have that problem in our churches often too, as all kinds of disrespectful and abusive behavior goes on, and we do the touch not my anointed thing. So that was a long way around your question, but I see resonances there.
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it's like lazy theology. I've used that term before, but just, it seems to me that we should be, particularly from a Baptist tradition and context, empowering people to understand the scriptures in ways that give them life and give them the ability to discern, to make decisions, to be able to even disciple other people, right? Amen. And yet the easy thing to do is to say, these people are wrong, these people are right. It's not evangelism. It's not, I'm going to be in relationship with you and we're going to journey together and we're going to discover some things about God together. It's not that. It's just, I'm just going to tell you what to do. And I think I'm deeply disturbed by this, because I think we abdicate a lot when we want to tell people what to do, to condemn them when they don't do it. And yet we're not in any kind of relationship with them. We're not in any we have no love, we have no understanding, we have no compassion, we have no empathy. And this whole idea that somehow you have to be that in order to get it. I've gone to the border. I say, I didn't have to be from Mexico to understand, you don't separate kids from their parents, or that there might be a situation so desperate where you are that you're like,
Exactly.
in order for us to live and to survive, we've got to get out of here, right? And so it just is really troubling that people who identify as Christians are all exhibiting, this kind of lazy theology and these ways of thinking that just are not reflective of the grace that we want bestowed on our own lives, and
Right.
I think that's work that we have to do, like that. We're not coming out of this place. Hopefully, we're coming out of this nightmare that we're living right now. But once we get out of it, there's a lot of repair. There's a lot
Absolutely.
of repair that has to be done, and I think the church has to lead it. And particularly, for the Black church to lead it would be even more meaningful because, first of all, we understand the levels of damage and trauma that has been bestowed upon us, and so I think it is a place for us to kind of step up and show a different way. I mean, we've got certainly our own issues, but there are some things we do understand about trauma, about being in chaos and confusion, and how to kind of to recover and at least move forward from that. I think in some ways we're still recovering from some of it, but I think it is a place where we can bear witness to who we say God is and show the way for our country.
So this,
Amen.
we talked about, Dr. Copeland, you mentioned the idea of accountability, right? I think one thing that we often don't do well, and that is to, Black voter turnout is largely consistent and second largest voting bloc in the country. Uh, the reality is we just live in a country where white voters dominate. 70% of the electorate is white, or so is white, right? And black people we often demonize ourselves by saying, well, we don't vote, and it's we actually do vote on par to white people. There's just actually more of them. But in spite of that, the Democratic Party, I'm not going to assume that either one of you are Democrats, but the Democratic Party, Black women are the most reliable voters in that party, right? And I say this as a Black male church leader, and I know for sure that I am guilty of the kind of patriarchy that I often criticize the church for doing, and the kind of racist patriarchy that I think the Democratic Party does. And so maybe we can put these two together. And it could be a totally bad question, but Black churches don't exist without Black women, and the Democratic Party cannot win without Black women, and Black churches are still alive, and and the Democratic Party is still alive because of Black women. What do both of these entities owe Black women as we are going into this election in terms of accountability? Like, if Joe wins, if Kamala wins, right? What are we doing to ensure that the Democratic Party does not abandon Black women on the other side, and to make sure that Black churches stop abandoning Black women through this and beyond?
That's a great question. I mean, so let's start with, I think we could I don't know that I know the answer to this, but I do know, I think there's a process question that goes into this, that goes back to the analogizing I was doing between discipleship and so on. I mean, I do think if we're going to be able to ask more from the church and from the Democratic Party as Black women, and I speak as a Black woman as well as a church leader, there has to be a kind of more, there needs to be a more radicalizing of our capacity and our willingness to ask for what we actually want. Now, for sure, I think it's fair to say that both in the church and in Democratic politics, that not all Black women want the same things. And so one of I think the challenges that we have had, and I'll speak for the church in particular, the church wouldn't last 10 seconds Black women only have to spend one Sunday where they say, we're not giving you our money. It wouldn't take but one,
Sure.
because you couldn't pay any of the bills.
True.
And I don't know a church where you could pay the bills for one Sunday based just on what the brethren give. I don't know a church where you can do that. And so, but we haven't organized ourselves around, you know what, here's some things we want. And then we're not gonna, and until we get that, we're not putting our money in here anymore. So I think part of what I hope for is for us to sort of spend some time together collectively deciding what we want, and collectively deciding that there will be some consequences if people are not responsive to the things that we say we want. Now, I'm pretty clear that on a political side, Black women want health care, we want child care, we want a living wage, and we want to be paid as much as our counterparts of other groups. If we could get there, I think we got those 4 policy things. If the Democrats show up with that, I think that's a good start. And it would actually help everybody else. There's very little that I don't hear us asking for anything that wouldn't actually make an immediate difference, not only for us, but for every single body else.
Right. True. Right. Which is what Black women do. I'm just saying. We have a tendency, to ask for things that help everybody, not that just help ourselves. I hope that both in the Democratic Party and in the church, we will have a voice, right? That we will be heard in ways that we haven't been heard before. I think too often, we see the bigger picture. We want freedom. We want to make sure everybody is taken care of. And so oftentimes we don't even think about, what is it that we need? Well, we need equal pay. I mean, we'll take, a wage and not even sometimes ask for more because we're like, well, and so that's work we have to do. But I do hope that we won't lose our voice. I think we're starting really honestly to really embrace our power in a different way. I'm hoping more women will run for office, more Black women will run for office, will not, because somebody told me, and I know this has been told many times, that in applying for jobs, a man will see a job description and he will have one little thing that he can do. And he'll go, oh, I'm applying for this. A woman will see one little thing she can't do. And she's like, right. Oh, well, maybe I shouldn't apply. But right. I think that same kind of mindset flows through so much of our lives, that we are willing to kind of step aside or diminish ourselves in order for the greater good, or whatever that may look like. And I hope now we're really embracing, and I think we are, our voice, our power, and that we're going to move forward in that way.
Progressive, you have heard from 2 of the greatest minds, 2 of the greatest leaders for our time, as we think deeply about who we want to be as Black church folk and who we want to be as Black citizens, but also what we want and what we need this democracy to be. So thank you, Dr. Copeland. Thank you, Dr. Callahan, for spending this time with us.
Thank you so much. You're a great moderator.
Yes,
Pastor.
Great conversation partners. You make it so easy. To the entire Progressive Convention, again, we thank our president for his leadership and for the cabinet that supports him. And we hope that next month you'll be right back here with the convention for another Progressive Hour. Make sure you vote. And make sure that you take someone to the polls with you, or you encourage some other people in your network to either mail in or show up, because as both of our panelists have said, there are lives on the line, and your vote could be the vote to help save thousands of lives, hundreds of thousands of lives. So Take care. Be blessed.